It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Tens of thousands of Afghans at risk because of a catastrophic data breach, which the UK government tried to keep secret. Also tonight, going for growth, the Chancellor uses her Mansion House speech to warn the city about excessive caution and joke about the pressures of the job.
A young girl said to me, "If you could have any job in the world, what would it be?" Now, given the events of the last few weeks, I suspect many of you would have sympathised if I had said anything but the Chancellor.
The BBC sacks MasterChef presenter John Turreau, but tonight he says nobody told him he's lost his job. An act of drunken stupidity, the defence given for felling the Sycamore Gap tree, as the two men who did it are each jailed for 4 years. Plus, warnings of more hosepipe bans to come as drought is declared in the West and East Midlands. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. 7,000 Afghan nationals are being relocated to the UK following a massive data breach by the British military that successive governments tried to keep secret with a super injunction. The blunder exposed the personal information of close to 20,000 individuals, endangering them and their families, with as many as 100,000 people affected in total. Well, the government is now facing a bill for relocation costs that could approach £1 billion. Here's our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes.
Chaos in Kabul when the Taliban returned to power. Many Afghans, fearing for their lives, wanted to flee. The UK offered some who'd worked with them the chance to move to Britain to avoid Taliban reprisals, but an official involved with the scheme accidentally sent an email with a list of almost 20,000 applicants to addresses outside a secure government network. A major data breach that happened back in 2022 and is only now being revealed after the lifting of extraordinary and expensive reporting restrictions requested by successive governments.
Mr. Speaker, this serious data incident should never have happened. It may have occurred 3 years ago under the previous government, but to all those whose information was compromised, I offer a sincere apology today on behalf of the British government. And I trust the Shadow Defence Secretary, as a former Defence Minister, will join me in this.
The blunder may have put lives at risk and is forcing ministers to relocate almost 7,000 Afghan nationals. And these are individuals who would otherwise not have been eligible for that kind of support. They're in addition to many thousands of Afghan nationals and their families who already did qualify to be relocated to the UK. This all comes at a time when immigration is an increasingly controversial topic and government finances are under significant strain. The Ministry of Defence says the total cost to the taxpayer of all Afghan relocations is set to be around £6 billion. But even that figure will likely rise as a legal firm is preparing a class action lawsuit over the data breach.
And of the 1,000 people that you're representing, how many of them are still in Afghanistan?
Approximately 25%. We receive regular emails from our clients to say that they're in hiding. If anyone knocks on their door, they don't open. They have to keep changing their address where they live, and they live a very unstable life because of that.
We spoke to one Afghan whose name was included in the mishandled list. He'd already resettled here in the UK because of his work with British forces, but is worried for friends still in Afghanistan whose data has also been compromised.
There is no safe for them. They can't walk freedom or freely relax on the city, nothing. They all hiding,
Mm-hmm. The UK hid its mistake behind a rare super injunction. With that now lifted by a High Court judge, the true price of this disaster is finally becoming clear. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Well, let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who is at the Ministry of Defence tonight. So, John, a massive data breach, a contested super injunction, a secret transfer of Afghans, and now the fallout.
A row over the cover-up, yes. I mean, this sorry tale all began, really, the retreat from Kabul in particular in 2021-2 when the Taliban seized control. You remember the row over Dominic Raab, the then Foreign Secretary, being on holiday on a sun lounger in Crete, it was claimed. Then there's really harrowing pictures of Afghans clinging to the wings of aeroplanes while they were moving along the tarmac. And now, of course, the scandal of this cover-up. John Healey told MPs it was when Ben Wallace was Secretary of State at the Ministry of Defence and James Heappey, with the Armed Forces Minister. They were the ministers involved. He apologised, as we've heard. He said he felt very uncomfortable over the use of super injunctions. You think of super injunctions, you think of celebrities going to court to cover up things like extramarital affairs, drug taking, all those sort of scandals. It's very rare for a government to go to court seeking a super injunction. And Mr. Healey was trying to claim the credit, really. He said he'd set up a review that would recommend the action that he's taken. But really, if it hadn't been for the tenacious campaigning of a number of media organisations, that injunction may not have been lifted by the High Court. Now, a lot of MPs complained about the cost, as you might expect. There were claims about individual cases were still not being dealt with satisfactorily. One MP accused Mr. Healey of wriggling. Now, significantly, in an interview after his Commons appearance, he was asked in an interview if the official who was responsible for the data breach was still employed by the government. His answer was they're no longer doing the same job on the Afghan brief. In other words, sounds like an official has perhaps moved to another government department. And asked whether he would have taken out that super injunction if he'd been Secretary of State in 2023, he said very, very unlikely. But when he was asked if he could rule out the use of super injunctions by the Ministry of Defence in the future, he said, well, you can never say never.
John, updating us there from the MoD. Thank you. Rachel Reeves tonight warned the city about the danger of excessive caution, claiming that Britain cannot grow without a financial sector that's fighting fit. She was delivering the Chancellor's annual Mansion House address at a time when she faces intense pressure to set out how she'll fill a black hole in the public finances. And she indirectly addressed that pressure in her speech.
Recently, on a visit to a primary school, a young girl said to me, "If you could have any job in the world, what would it be?" Now, given the events of the last few weeks, I suspect many of you would have sympathised if I had said anything but the Chancellor. But I didn't, because I am proud to stand here tonight and address you for a second time at Mansion House as the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, our data and economics editor, Ed Conway, is here with us. Everything surrounding the Chancellor drowns in speculation at the moment, doesn't it? But did we learn anything tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was the elephant in the room, wasn't it? Was she going to address what happened in the Commons a couple of weeks ago? And this was her first big speech since that moment. She kind of did. She didn't really... I mean, the other question is, there is this enormous black hole, and it's not a great term, but nonetheless, there's a problem here, which is that given that they can't get all of these welfare reforms ahead, they need to try and raise some money somehow to make the sums add up, and they haven't really said how they're going to raise that money, and most people think it's going to be higher taxes. There was a lot of speculation that maybe some of those measures might start to poke out through the speech tonight. This is the big opportunity for the Chancellor to come out there and say, look, here's what we want to do to try and sort out not the stuff in the budget, but just how is financial regulation working? So what do we do with banks? How do we encourage them to lend more money or lend less money, depending on how the economy is doing? And while there was certainly some stuff on that, so the main thrust, and there's a whole litany of different little bits and pieces. The government said it's the biggest set of financial regulations reforms that they've had in a decade. I'm not entirely sure whether that's the case, given that Jeremy Hunt said basically the same thing 2 years ago. But nonetheless, there's lots of reforms. The main thrust is trying to make it easier for banks to lend more money, trying to get rid of some of the more onerous regulations that have been on their balance sheets for some time. And that's a big seismic thing. Since the financial crisis, there have been all these rules saying you've got to be a bit careful. Those are being loosened, and they continue to be loosened in this speech. But there wasn't, for instance, some people thought that they were going to change the rules on ISAs, tax-free spending, saving rather, to make it more difficult, to raise a bit more money, make it more difficult to save. They didn't do that. Some people thought there was going to be a bank levy, or rather they've got a bank levy and that they were going to raise the bank levy and raise more money. They didn't do that either. And they didn't really directly address that black hole. But the Chancellor did say she was adamant she was going to keep to her fiscal rules. And what does that mean? It means there's more question marks ahead, because if she's going to keep the fiscal rules, if she's not going to change her spending plans, then lo and behold, she's going to have to raise taxes, and we still don't know what those taxes are going to be. So I think those questions in the coming weeks and months, Anna, are just going to continue to concatenate, because we don't know what taxes are going to go up, but we kind of know they are going to go up at some point.
Ed, thank you for that. Now, the BBC says that MasterChef presenter John Turode has been sacked over an allegation that he used racist language. The chef claims he has no recollection of the alleged incident, which emerged during the Greg Wallace investigation. Tonight, Mr Turode said he's not had any contact with the BBC or the production company behind MasterChef to tell him he's lost his job. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer reports on a warning of some flashing images coming up.
They cook in about 8 minutes, 6 to 8 minutes.
It is a headline that almost writes itself. MasterChef's remaining presenter now also for the chop. John Turode had successfully distanced himself from claims relating to his former co-host Greg Wallace's inappropriate behaviour, weathering the storm. But after identifying himself as having an allegation upheld against him following the same investigation into his colleague's behaviour, the heat was turned up, with claims he allegedly used what the BBC say is an extremely offensive racist term. While he denies the allegation, has no recollection of the alleged incident, does not believe it happened, and says that any racial language is wholly unacceptable, a BBC spokesperson confirming it takes the upheld finding extremely seriously. We will not tolerate racist language of any kind. Action must be taken. John Turode's contract on MasterChef will not be renewed. With the Director General's leadership being called into question after a slew of errors, the writing perhaps on the wall. Tim Davie keen to be seen leading from the front, albeit in an interview with his own news channel.
I was not directly involved in the looking at the detail, but I heard what the recommendation was, and I was happy that the team were taking action. I would say it's really important. We are taking this seriously. It's a reset where we make sure that people are living up to the values we expect across the board, and that's really important.
Prompting Turode to hit back online with this statement. I am seeing and reading that I've been sacked from MasterChef, and I repeat that I have no recollection of what I'm accused of. The inquiry could not even state the date or year of when I am meant to have said something wrong. I'd hoped that I'd have some say in my exit from a show I'd worked on since its relaunch in 2005. Personally, I've loved every minute working on MasterChef, but it's time to pass the cutlery to someone else. I will watch fondly from afar. Scandal once again overshadowing a day when the BBC was supposed to be talking about its annual report.
These scandals do not help the BBC. They damage trust, and they leave people questioning whether the licence fee is something that they consider to be worth paying every year.
This is where the wave of ambition hits the rock of reality.
Any attempt to boast by the BBC over its successes in its annual report, overshadowed by the hot water its Director General and some of its stars find themselves in.
And Katie joins me now. So is John Turode then, Katie, collateral damage?
Look, given the strength of the statement that he issued this evening, he would very much argue that he has been absolutely hung out to dry over this. He doesn't believe that he has done anything wrong. He doesn't remember this incident. And it does feel a bit, given the speed of the sacking that this has happened, it does feel a bit more than just MasterChef as being the issue at the heart of this. Don't forget, this response came after the Director General today faced a real barrage of questions from journalists in the briefing after the annual report was released today over the future of his leadership, from people saying, have you considered resigning? Why haven't you considered resigning after Glastonbury, after the Gaza documentary, after the Greg Wallace inappropriate behaviour allegations? Why is somebody from senior leadership not taking control of this? Now, he managed to ride out that press briefing, but then we saw this very strong reaction coming this evening of him going in front of his own own team to give an interview to say that how he was dealing with the John Torode incident. But, I mean, look, he was asked earlier in the day, and he spoke a lot about the fact that if there's any sort of delays, it comes about because they have to follow due process. Now, John Torode, I would bet you tonight would be saying, well, that due process absolutely has gone out the window in the case of him. Often we talk about the BBC being paralysed by red tape. I think if the Director General hadn't acted very quickly on this, though, he understood that his job would have been really on the line. He's been in a bad place the last few weeks. He had to be seen to be decisive on this.
Katie, thank you. The crimes committed by David Fuller, the so-called monster in the morgue, could easily happen again. That the finding of an inquiry into the hospital worker who abused at least 100 deceased women and girls. The inquiry cited serious failings at the hospitals where he worked, which meant he was able to offend for 15 years without being suspected or caught. This report from Sky's home editor Jason Farrell contains details you may find distressing.
Much as we'd like to, we mustn't forget what David Fuller did. The NHS electrician sexually abused more than 100 bodies in 2 Kent hospital mortuaries. Women, young and old, including 24-year-old Azra Kamal.
I spent time with Azra in the mortuary, and that moment helped me heal. We spent 2 hours together. And then subsequently I found out that prior to my visit and shortly after my visit of my only child in the mortuary, she had been raped.
Today's inquiry looked at how we protect the dead in other hospitals, hospices and funeral parlours across England. And it concluded this.
I have asked myself whether there could be a recurrence of the appalling crimes committed by David Fuller. I have concluded that yes, it is entirely possible that such offences could be repeated.
The report found regulation and oversight of the care of people after death are partial, ineffective and in significant areas completely lacking. It said such offences could happen again and that there should be statutory regulation in place to protect the security and dignity of people after death.
If I wanted to become a funeral director and set up in my garden shed, could I do that tomorrow?
Yes, you could. At present, anybody can set up as a funeral director. They need no specific training or qualifications, and you can just do it, and nobody could stop you.
And how do you feel about that?
As I said in my interim report on it's appalling. It's entirely inappropriate, which is why I'm calling for statutory regulation.
The government is considering the recommendations, but the families of Fuller's victims also want them to consider how they are treated. 4 years on, they're still fighting for compensation and have to prove the impact on them personally.
It is not my responsibility to prove to the solicitors, the lawyers of the NHS Trust, that this has devastated me. They don't know my nightmares, and they will never know because they don't live it, Jason.
What do you think Azra would make of all of this and what you've had to put yourself through?
She would say, I'm sorry, Mum. It wasn't my fault.
This isn't just about the dead, but also those who loved them. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
It was a senseless crime that shocked the country and made headlines around the globe, the felling of the famous Sycamore Gap tree in Northumberland. Today, the 2 men responsible were sent to prison for more than 4 years, the judge telling them they chopped down the centuries-old tree for no other reason than sheer bravado. Our North of England correspondent Shingi Marike has more.
It was a piece of regional heritage, known around the world. The Sycamore Gap tree stood for more than 150 years. Until it was felled, an act of mindless vandalism that took mere minutes. In a video digitally enhanced by Northumbria Police, you see the outline of a person, hear a chainsaw, and then the tree topples. That act was carried out by 2 men, Daniel Graham and Adam Carruthers. As the famous site was turned into a crime scene,
They
if you could just clear back a tad, just a touch.
The pair revelled in their actions, described in court as a moronic mission. Once friends, Carruthers and Graham also exchanged these voice notes.
Someone there's tagged like ITV News, BBC News, Sky News, like news. I think it's gonna go wild.
It's on Sky News as we speak.
That bravado after an act of destruction commented on by the judge as she sentenced them both to 4 years and 3 months in prison.
Felling the tree in the middle of the night and in the middle of the storm gave you some sort of thrill, as did the media coverage of your crimes over the following days. You revelled in the coverage, taking evident pride in what you had done.
The detective who led the team working on the case said despite the crime and public outcry being unique, their approach was textbook.
Walk us through the first hours and days after which you learned that the tree had been cut down, this totemic tree, an emblem of the Northeast. What was that like, beginning this investigation?
My focus from the very start was to ensure that those golden hour principles were stuck to, and I was gathering as much information as possible to prevent the loss thereof.
This was a case that not only provoked anger, but intrigue, with a lengthy discussion in court about the sentencing guidelines. The closest we got to an explanation from either was Carruthers saying that this was an act of drunken stupidity, a decision his lawyers say he'll have to live with for the rest of his life. The court also heard a statement read out on behalf of the National Trust, who had been contacted thousands of times since by people who wanted to reflect on what the tree meant to them. Whilst the National Trust has cared for it on behalf of the nation, it belonged to the people. When it became clear this was a malicious and deliberate act, the question was why anyone would do this to such a beautiful tree in such a special place. With the pair now imprisoned, thoughts will return to a symbol of the Northeast that represented pride and place. With new shoots already growing from the stump and saplings planted around the country, the sycamore gap tree's legacy and future can once again become the focus. Shinki Marike, Sky News, Newcastle Crown Court.
A grandfather and grandmother have been found guilty of the murder of their 2-year-old grandson. Ethan Ives Griffiths from Garden City in Flintshire died in August 2021 after suffering a catastrophic head injury. Michael and Kerry Ives were also found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child, as well as cruelty to a child. Israeli airstrikes have killed 12 people, including 5 Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon, in the deadliest attack since the ceasefire between the two countries was announced last November. Israel's military said it targeted a Hezbollah training camp and weapons warehouses in the Bekaa Valley region. A spokesperson for Southend Airport says it will continue to remain closed until further notice as the investigation continues into Sunday's plane crash. Essex police say they are working to recover a 4th body in what's been described as an extremely complex operation at the crash site. More areas of the country officially entered drought conditions today, with the East and West Midlands joining the North West and Yorkshire after yet another spell of hot weather. It's been the driest start to the year for England since 1976, and the public is once again being asked to use water wisely. But the government and water companies are facing questions over a lack of investment in the country's infrastructure. Here's our science correspondent, Thomas Moore.
Much needed rain in Derbyshire's Derwent Valley, but don't be fooled. Like much of England, it is parched with worryingly low water levels in reservoirs. It's been the driest start to a year since 1976, and after 3 heat waves already, the government's National Drought Group is increasingly concerned. It's extended official drought status to the East and West Midlands, which join the North West and Yorkshire, which have been in drought for several weeks.
We need to stop talking about these being extreme weather events and start to accept that because of climate change, things like this are going to be more normal. So as for whether more companies will introduce temporary use bans, that really genuinely depends on what happens with the weather over the next few months.
The Environment Agency has drawn up a reasonable worst-case scenario, showing much of England officially suffering drought or prolonged dry weather by the end of this month. Even with rainfall just 20% below normal and no further heat waves, the situation is expected to deteriorate in August, meaning that by autumn, Devon and Cornwall will be the only regions completely unaffected. Ardingly Reservoir in Sussex is just 3/4 full, a record low for the time of year. Emptying reservoirs and falling river levels make hosepipe bans more likely. Within days, 8 million people in England will have restrictions on their water use. Millions more could be affected in the coming months if the drought worsens. But hosepipe bans reflect a lack of capacity. No reservoirs have been built since 1992. Since then, the population has grown by 12 million people and climate change has only worsened. And water leaks waste precious supplies. On the day the drought was extended, this was South London, where a burst Thames water main closed schools and forced evacuations. 3 billion litres of water are lost every day. That's 1,200 Olympic swimming pools.
We do have a largely Victorian-based supply system. So a lot of our infrastructure is in desperate need of upgrading. In replacement of water mains is of the order of once every 100 years in this country. And that, frankly, is shocking. This is outdated thinking and outdated infrastructure to cope with problems of the now and the future.
The possibility of drought as bad as 1976, when the taps ran dry and people had to queue in the street for water, seems unlikely for now. But pressure is building on the government and on the water companies to explain why drought is becoming the new normal. Thomas Moore, Sky News in Sussex.
The world's most comprehensive human imaging project is helping scientists understand more about how, why and when we get sick. The UK Biobank has now scanned 100,000 people from head to toe, taking recordings of hearts, brains, blood vessels and bones. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, has been looking at how it could transform the way diseases are detected and treated.
For a decade, volunteers like this have been donning gowns and lying down in medical scanners up and down the UK. But Steve here is special, the 100,000th participant in something called UK Biobank to have nearly every part of his body scanned, completing a project to build the world's most comprehensive medical image database.
This is a huge milestone for UK Biobank because when we started the project 11 years ago, no one thought this was feasible. What this imaging data will enable researchers to do is just to answer questions like, why is it that someone in their early 60s has the heart function or the brain function of someone 10 years older? What are the genetic and lifestyle factors that influence accelerated aging and the development of disease?
So right now, Steve is spending 30 minutes lying stock still in this MRI scanner, having his whole body imaged. And after that, it's straight on to another MRI for another 30 minutes, having his brain scanned in intimate detail. Add together all the other tests and procedures that go on. It's a 4 to 5 hour commitment of his time. It makes you wonder why he and 100,000 other people have volunteered to do it.
I've had family who've had health issues. My mum in particular at the moment now, she's suffering from early stages of dementia. Close friends have had cancer and things. Giving up my time for medical research, who can learn from people, the lifestyles, the health, and obviously what their bodies are like, which ultimately, at the end of the day, is going to help medical research for the future.
Scans of the brains, hearts, abdomens, as well as ultrasound images and x-rays from 100,000 volunteers are all anonymised. And their real power comes from being linked to the medical and lifestyle data of each de-identified participant, along with biological samples, like this tube of Steve's blood. That will be added to this frozen library of lives, 10 million tiny tubes of samples from the 500,000 participants in the wider Biobank project. Every day, a Sub-Zero robot serves requests for data from more than 20,000 researchers around the world, many of whom are now using AI to make the most of the 30,000 petabytes now available to them.
We predicted it would take us thousands of years of manual analysis. Now we can analyse everything in seconds. It's quite extraordinary. We can now look at every organ and tissue in the body, and that has helped us understand things like aneurysm risks, how muscle fat is related to frailty, and how liver fat is prevalent in like 25% of the UK population. So we've been able to understand a lot about all sorts of disease mechanisms just from the biobank data.
And soon there'll be more. The next step, already underway, is to rescan 60,000 of these volunteers over time to reveal even more about how our bodies change as we age. Tom Clark, Sky News, Reading.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the Chief Executive of Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman. Welcome to both of you. Among the stories, we'll be discussing this on the front of The Guardian. The headline, thousands of Afghans relocated to the UK in a secret scheme after a data leak. That and plenty more, of course, when we come back.